having periods of the day where you let the mind defocus and just kind of drift, that is what allows you to focus. If you have a weird, really wonky schedule, people always say, should I wake up just to see the sunrise or the sunlight? Probably. If people are feeling that they're not motivated, there's a key step that people need to take, which is to start.
What is the connection between vision and the brain? Most people just think of, well, our brain tells our eyes, what to look for, or our eyes provide some information that our brain makes sense out of, but it actually goes a lot deeper than that.
Yeah, so the visual system is amazing, right? And I mean, we have a lot of sensory systems. We smell, we hear, we feel touch, et cetera. Humans are so strongly dependent on vision. But I think when we think about the normal ways in which we rely on vision, seeing objects, avoiding cars, recognizing faces, we miss a lot of the even more, or at least equally exciting aspects of visual science. So a couple things about vision and the brain. First of all, your eyes have on the back of them, most people know this, a thin layer of cells, nerve cells, neurons, and those cells are brain. They are central nervous system. So the only part of your brain that's outside your skull or spinal cord is your retinas. So the eyes are sometimes called the window to the soul. I don't know much about souls because I don't work on them, but I definitely know that the eyes are two pieces of your brain that are outside your skull. And you go, well, wow, that's kind of weird. Why would that be? Well, it turns out that the original job of the eyes was not to see objects and shapes and colors and recognize faces. The original purpose, the ancient part of the retina, was placed outside of the skull to be able to adjust the overall state of the rest of the nervous system, right? So that, because in order to feel touch, I have to be in contact with something. Sound waves can arrive and smells can arrive from a distance. But in humans, the way that we adjust our overall levels of alertness or sleepiness or focus or other states of mind is by our eyes. So the eyes aren't connected to the brain. The eyes are brain. So these two things in the front of my face are two little pieces of my brain that are out in the world trying to figure out what the brain that's inside the skull and the rest of the central nervous system, which of course is inside the spinal cord, should do, how alert they should be, what they should pay attention to, and all that other stuff. So fundamentally, the eyes are the brain. And then you say, well, how does this work? How do these little two pieces of brain adjust the state of the rest of the brain? And so the main way they do that is by paying attention to how bright it is outside and how dark it is and when. So the Earth spins once every 24 hours. We know that. And it's not a coincidence that every cell in the body, from a liver cell to a brain cell to a retinal cell, has a clock. All its gene expression programs are on a 24-hour timer. Now, not all the clocks are synchronized, right? Sometimes your liver needs to be more active than another part of your body. Your heart needs to be active 24 hours a day. You don't want your heart to shut down at night. It might slow, but you don't want it to shut down. So there's this concept of the body as like this factory of all these different cells that all start and end some process on a 24-hour cycle. The eyes have neurons that send information down the optic nerves to the central circadian clock right above the roof of your mouth called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And the suprachiasmatic nucleus coordinates the activity like the, sort of a factory overseer coordinates the activity of all the cells in the body. So the liver is active at the right times, the heart is active in particular ways at the right times, the neurons, the brain, et cetera. And the consequence of that is I'm alert during the daytime and I tend to get sleepy about 16 hours after I view that first sunlight. So in other words, the eyes are pieces of brain that were designed to detect sunlight because that's what cues when it's daytime and the brain should be active and alert and metabolic process should be going one way and when nighttime is happening. And so we're a series of timers and the eyes are fundamentally important for that timing. Now, the next sort of layer of sophistication in this visual system is related to very subconscious or purely subconscious things like as I walk through an environment and I experience optic flow, things passing by me, I don't even have to be conscious of those things. But as they flow past me, it signals to the other parts of my brain that I'm moving, and therefore it triggers the balance system to how to keep my balance. It actually, and we could talk about this a little bit more later, it sends signals to the emotional centers of the brain to quiet down anxiety. So when we're in forward motion, it actually quiets the fear and anxiety circuits. There's a well-known set of studies, about 5 studies in the last few years, in mice and in humans, showing that this optic flow pattern generates a subconscious eye movement from side to side, which quiets the amygdala, the threat detection center of the brain.
Which is why you've shared before the power of things that we, all know well, is like, why do we feel so good when we're traveling and we're walking around a new city? Why does it feel so good to take a walk when we're stressed? Because that's built inside of our nervous system. It feels like we're moving forward, and it feels like we can handle any kind of threat or stress that we're dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, for the listeners that may have heard of EMDR, so eye movement desensitization reprocessing, this is a therapeutic tool that's used in the clinic to deal with trauma and fear and anxiety, where people move their eyes from side to side, which looks kind of goofy if, when you look at it from the perspective of, well, I'm just sitting still moving my eyes from side to side. That's weird. But that mimics the forward movement of the body. And the body doesn't know the difference between whether or not you're actually moving through a physical environment by walking, or whether or not you're just moving your eyes from side to side. And that underscores the fact that the eyes are the dominant force in driving these states of mind, right? So the fear centers of the brain don't actually know about the movement of my limbs. They know about the movement of my eyes, right?
It's
and
powerful.
So, yeah, it's amazing. And I can't take any credit for EMDR. I think, Francine Shapiro discovered that while taking a walk. She was a therapist. She was taking a walk, I think in the woods behind Palo Alto, where she lived at the time, and realized that some of her anxiety was reduced by the walk. And then, vertical eye movements and keeping your eyes closed didn't have the same effect. And she exported that to the clinic, because it's hard to do therapy while people are walking. Walking, you can walk side by side, but it's just not very practical for the typical therapeutic setting of Zoom, or at that time, people met in offices and held therapy sessions. So EMDR is anchored in this idea. And then you get into the ways in which the eyes and vision are important for seeing objects, what direction those objects are moving. And then eventually you got trichromacy, which is most people are, unless they're colorblind, they see colors and this richness of color that conveys a lot of information besides just picking fruit. You always see the textbook examples of how much easier it is to pick out a beautiful red apple compared to the green apples. Actually, a lot of picking out fruit and vegetables is actually by smell. If you look at people in the supermarket, I guess before they had masks on, they would smell things. But color is a very powerful cue for all sorts of health metrics. We can recognize when we're off or not quite right based on subtle variations in skin tone and things. Eye sheen. In any case, the eyes are doing a lot, and a lot more than just vision. Actually, I'll share a brief note about the circadian biology and the sleep wake stuff.
Please.
There's a guy, a really impressive human being. Everyone should check him out. I've never met him in person, but there's a guy named Dan Mancina, who's a professional skateboarder who is blind. And he has retinitis pigmentosa. And I've known Dan for a little while through conversation. I learned about him. He's very impressive. Just check out his stuff. He's doing incredibly inspirational and directly powerful work in advocacy for blind populations. Anyway, he and I were in contact because he was asking about sleep and sleep issues. A lot of people who are blind have issues with sleep because if they've had their eyes removed or replaced for whatever reason, or if they're lacking all the cells in the retina, including the cells that signal time of day, they have sleep issues. But it turns out that for some people who are can't see, they're completely pattern blind, they can still at a subconscious level, the retina can still perceive light coming in and can signal these circadian clocks. And so Chuck Zeisler's lab at Harvard Medical School showed that some, not all blind people, can improve their quality and depth and timing of sleep by viewing light, even though they can't see that light. And so you and I, the same thing happens for you and I. I mentioned Dan because, he and I are in conversations about how to get some of this information out to the what they call the low vision community, or people who are blind. But in any event, I think that most people don't realize that these two little pieces of brain that we call the eyes and retina that are outside our skull are controlling a tremendous number of aspects of our life. So optic flow is powerful, getting into self-generated optic flow each day, walking or running or biking. Driving doesn't quite have the same effect, but it might, or motorcycle riding, probably dangerous for other reasons. Probably don't want to do that because we could have a discussion about spinal cord injury, but getting morning light is just absolutely powerful. And then of course, nowadays people are walking, looking at their phone, or they're really glued to the screen of their phone while they're out walking or even exercising sometimes. And then what you do is when you do that is you short circuit the process of relieving the anxiety that occurs with an optic flow. So, because the eyes are fixated, they're not moving from side to side. And then you ask, well, people have all these sleep issues. There's a lot of depression and sleep issues, and those could be caused by a number of things. But my friend Samar Hattar's lab at National Institutes of Health and also David Burson at Brown University have shown that the light that comes from the phone in the middle of the night from about 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. suppresses dopamine release through a pathway involving a brain structure called the habenula and can lead to memory defects. So now you start piecing together these things that we see in society, like, oh, when I take a run, I feel better, or, I'm just exhausted and kind of stressed. And, I wake up in the middle of the night and I look at my phone. You can start tacking the vision science to these things that we know are problematic. And what's so cool is that the solutions lie in establishing those connections. When you start realizing what's happening, you can relieve a lot of sleep issues. This is why Dan and I got into that conversation about what he might or might not be doing in terms of visual behavior, or people who are waking up in the middle of the night and they're trying to get back to sleep by looking at their phone. And even though it's got that nighttime setting, they're actively promoting a depressive state to kick in about a day later. And so, there's a lot of links that I think are starting to establish themselves because of, in part because of social media. There's this convergence of information on podcasts and social media, and science is, at least I'm trying to butt my head into that. And Sachin Panda has been contributing a lot, a former colleague of mine from the Salk Institute. Samar Hattar is now on social media. And so these neuroscientists are starting to raise their hands and say, hey, I think I might know what's going on here. And maybe there's something we could do right now in order to alleviate these issues.
There's a few things to say on that side. Interestingly enough, we have Eric Weinmer coming on the podcast, who was the first blind person to climb Mount Everest. And he has an organization. I know he's talked a little bit about some of these stuff, but he doesn't have the neuroscience piece. It would be great to get him involved in that conversation. But going back to it, it's, I often think about, one of my favorite spiritual thinkers, philosophers is Eckhart Tolle. And he talks about this idea that it's in the nature of humanity to have had something and we take it for granted. It's just built into our nature, right? We grow up on the plains, we're out in the jungle, we're out in the woods. We don't have to think about having better sleep. It's just sort of baked into our life. It's there. But then we lose this thing. We lose it because of technology. We lose it because of advancements, which have brought a really beautiful things to our life. And then on the other end of it, after we've lost it, we have this yearning to figure out why has it been lost and what can we do to bring it back. We find it, but we find it at a deeper level. We find it at a deeper level that helps us understand that we don't have to take it for granted anymore. And I really think of your work through that lens. It's not, these are, somebody would listen to him and say, wow, that really makes sense. But it's a whole other aspect to connect the pieces of science together or to do the studies and really show people that this thing that seems very innocent, using your phone at night, can have all sorts of cascading implications the next day when it comes to your sleep. And by the way, you touched on it, but not directly. It's a lot deeper than just the blue light conversation. Right? Can you expand on that a little bit? A lot of people here have heard about blue light and the importance of minimizing blue light, but it's not just about blue light.
Yeah. So what? It's right, because by mentioning social media at the beginning, I've kind of cued my brain to it. But there are a lot of crazy ideas in the world of biohacking. There's just some downright crazy and some dangerous ideas, and at the same time, there's some really great prompts from the field of biohacking, and one of them is this whole issue of the color of light. Okay. And I'm always reluctant to get into this because I feel like sooner or later, I'm going to end up in a head-to-head combat with somebody who's really into like red light therapy or something. And my response is always, look, double-blind peer-reviewed literature is important. It's not everything because oftentimes these more esoteric practices or things where there hasn't been a lot of published research, they're just not there yet, right? I mean, my lab studies respiration that was prompted by a lot of work that people are doing, like Oxygen Advantage, Brian McKenzie, Patrick McEwen, Wim Hof, like Tumo breathers. They can highlight certain things that science might want to take a closer look at. Now, when it comes to the blue light issue, this is especially salient. So here's the idea. So the light, getting bright light in the middle of the night from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. triggers these pro-depressive circuits through the habenula, this Habenula, this interesting structure in the thalamus. In addition to that, it's known to trigger a pathway from the habenula to the pancreas that can start altering some blood sugar rhythms. A lot of people don't know this, but the habenula connects to the pancreas, and actually in type 2 diabetes, and in particular smoking-induced type 2 diabetes, it appears that the habenula pancreas pathway is involved. There's a beautiful paper published in Nature not long ago that illustrates that. Not my work, another group's work. So blue light in the middle of the night is going to be very effective at triggering these pro-depressive circuits and disrupting the things that you want in a not so good way through the habenula and other pathways. But it turns out that blue light is not the culprit. It's the brightness of the light and the intensity of the light that matters most. You can have a bright white light or a bright red light and still get these negative effects. Now, the reason for that is that early in the day, which is when you want it shortly after waking, even if it's still dark out, but certainly once the sun is up, you want to get some bright light in your eyes, ideally from sunlight early in the day. Here's why. Early in the day, the sensitivity to light for the retina is low, so you need a lot of bright light in the morning in order to stimulate the pathways correctly. As nighttime approaches, and especially when you've been asleep for a few hours, the sensitivity of the retina goes up. So this is something that isn't often discussed, but there's a circadian rhythm to sensitivity of the retina, so that very low levels of light, regardless of color, can trigger these negative effects in the middle of the night, but they wouldn't be sufficient to induce the positive effects during the daytime. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there. So what do you do? Well, first of all, I want to be clear that viewing a bathroom light in the middle of the night, if you have to go to the bathroom, is not the end of the world. It's not going to make you depressed. I mean, if you're viewing bright light in the middle of the night on a consistent basis, that's not good, regardless of color. But for people that think that they can get away with just using amber lights or red lights and still be okay, that's probably not true in the wee hours of the morning between 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. is kind of a broad area there, but time frame rather. But I think really midnight to 3 a.m. you want to avoid bright light. So blue blockers are a big deal now. Everyone's crazy about blue blockers, and they will help mitigate some of the effects. But I had Samer Hattar, head of the chronobiology unit, National Institutes of Health, on my Instagram. We did an Instagram Live, and he thinks that most of the effects of the blue blockers are just filtering out brightness of light. And he actually has concerns about doing very narrow band or narrow wavelength filtering of light. That's a very unusual situation for the visual system to be in, to take out one band of light for significant portions of the day. So am I anti-blue blocker? No. I always worry, are the blue blockinistas going to come after me? Okay, maybe. We can have a discussion. I think they can help, but it's really not about blue light. Now, as long as we're talking about the color of light, it always comes up, well, what do you think about these bright light things in the morning to get really bright red light? Typically, it's a sheet of red lights. Again, I don't think it has anything to do with the red light. I think it has to do with the brightness. And then I usually get attacked by the mitochondrial folks, and they go, yeah, but what about the effects of red light on mitochondria? And I go, okay, that's a separate conversation. So I want to be really clear that what I'm discussing here is the brightness of light is the key parameter. Avoid bright lights in the middle of the night. Get bright light early in the day, ideally from sunlight. So really bright during the day, cave-like at night is ideal. No one's perfect, but think of that as your perfect diet. No one's perfect with their diet either, as far as I know. So, play around that kind of perfect scenario and do the best that you can.
And on a practical level, when you're winding down at night, right? You're talking about 11, 12. I usually go to bed around, let's say 10:30, right? 10:30, 11. So as I'm starting to wind down for bed and start to think around 9 o'clock, are there things that you do on a practical level in your own home that start to help that process?
Definitely. So one of the things you can do is to make whatever lights you have in your environment low in the physical environment, meaning not overhead lights. The reason is that the retinal cells called melanopsin or intrinsically photosensitive ganglion cells that pay attention to the kinds of cues that reset your circadian rhythm and can alter your circadian rhythm are in the lower half of your eye. And so they view the upper visual field. They were designed to look at the sky. So overhead lights are going to more strongly stimulate your circadian system and all these systems than lights that are set on tables or that are lamps that are about head height in the room. And it's not a subtle effect. It's actually quite a large effect. And actually you can use that to your advantage early in the day. Early in the day, let's say you wake up before the sunrise and you want to wake up, or you have seasonal depression and you want to get more light in order to feel happier in the winter months, especially if you live at, in Scandinavia or someplace very far north. You want to turn on a lot of overhead lights. And as nighttime approaches, you want to shut off overhead lights and use dimmer lights that are set lower in the room. They don't have to be floor lights. It doesn't have to be like airplane or movie theater style, although that would be cool if you could do that in your home. Maybe someone will do that. Maybe Ben Greenfield probably does that. He's like kind of taking it biohacking to the extreme. And again, I tip my hat to him because it's kind of cool to see what people are willing to do and how far they're willing to push this stuff. But short of putting floor lights in for the nighttime and overhead lights for the daytime in your home, you can set desk lamps, and dim amber light tends to be softest, the softer lights. And so dim amber light is great. Candlelight is fine. Thank goodness. Fireplace, fine. Thank goodness. There's a beautiful study that was done by a group at the University of Colorado that took graduate students camping. But so this would be cool to be a subject in this experiment. And they published this in Current Biology, so peer-reviewed, really, really strong paper. They published several of these actually. And what's cool is they looked at students who have been studying a lot on tablets and laptops and been on their phones, and they have very disrupted cortisol rhythms and melatonin rhythms. You want cortisol higher in the morning, and then it tapers off as the evening comes around, and then melatonin comes up usually about 16 hours after you got that morning light, your brightest light of the day. So melatonin that makes you sleepy, helps you fall asleep. This is endogenous melatonin, not supplemented melatonin. These students had really disrupted cortisol melatonin rhythms. I think they'd been studying for exams. So they took them camping and away from devices and let them just use flashlights and campfire and that kind of thing for a weekend. And it completely reset their cortisol and their melatonin rhythms to the correct healthy pattern. And that lasted quite a while. So I want to emphasize that, one night of a messed up sleep where you turn on the lights, you have to, God forbid, drive to the hospital or something like that. It's not going to screw you up long-term. It's the consistent light viewing in the middle of the night and the consistent light viewing early in the day that sets you up for poor and great, feeling and well-being respectively. So it's your average behavior, just like diet. Just like nutrition, it's the average. If I eat something really sugary, is it going to completely dismantle my health? No, because, I'm not diabetic and the chances are it's not going to disrupt me much. But if I do it on a consistent basis, it's going to start to dismantle my health. So,
but if I could just interject, the one thing that was quite inspiring by that study, and obviously it's just one study and it's with a group of college students that are there, but it's inspiring to know that just one weekend of going out and camping could be part of that reset process. So for anybody who feels like that is me, as they're listening to you and they're thinking about the overhead light in their bathroom, or they're thinking about the overhead light that's there, or the constant sort of work exposure or computer exposure that they've had and built up bad habits through that process, it could even be that maybe try going for a weekend of camping and seeing how that feels and how you respond to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. When people have sleep issues, the first thing I say is not, are you drinking caffeine late in the day? Are you keeping the room cool at night? That stuff, sure, that's important. You don't want to drink coffee at 8 p.m. and expect to sleep well, unless, that some people can do that, but most people can't. But I always say, are you getting sunlight in your eyes within an hour of waking up? And people always think I mean you have to watch the sun rise across the horizon. I don't do that, but it's low. So the cells in your eye that send all these good signals during the day are looking for what's called low solar angle. So they're looking for when the sun is low relative to the horizon, but it doesn't have to just be crossing the horizon. Usually they say no. And I said, do you see sunlight before you see your phone, before screen light? And usually they say no. And so I say, well, just try and get 2 to 10 minutes of sunlight. And they say, well, it's cloudy where I live. I don't live in sunny California like you do. there are so many photons coming through cloud cover. It's amazing. Far more than are coming from one of these indoor lights. So then people say, wait, but you said indoor lights are bad for me, but they're not even bright enough to stimulate my clock. But remember, during the day, the sensitivity of your eye is low. You need a lot of bright light. And at night, the sensitivity of your eye is high, which means it doesn't take much bright light from an artificial source. So if you really want to get geeky about this for the biohacker types out there, there's a free app. I have no relationship to them, but never met them, don't know who they are. But it's called like the Lux app, and it's a lux meter. And so LUX. And so you can go outside on a cloudy day and you can point it to the sky and it'll show you, even on a really overcast day, even in Seattle, unless you're in the depth of winter, there are more photons coming through than there would be for a really bright indoor light. And so in the morning, you might need some artificial sources to supplement that bright light, or the outdoor light rather, if you live in, Seattle in the depths of winter, or Sweden in the depths of winter. But really what you need to do is get outside and get some natural light in your eyes within the first hour of waking. And that sets your sleep timer. And most people find that one shift can really help. And then of course, stay off lights in the middle of the night. There's one other little tip that I think can be helpful. Nobody's perfect. And a lot of us, including me, wake up in the middle of the night, use the restroom, maybe peer at our phone. Samar Hattar, who is this guy I mentioned who runs the chronobiology unit, we've traveled a lot together because we're good friends and we've gone to conferences. And he's always looking at his phone in the middle of the night, like putting it away, like trying not to look at it. I'm like, Samar, it doesn't work that way. And he goes, oh, I know. And so, we know this stuff and we screw up too, right? It's like nobody's immune to that. But what you can do is if you can see a little bit of sunlight in the evening when low solar angle is happening because the sun is setting. Remember, you don't have to look directly at the sun. It doesn't have to beam you in the eyes, but getting outside and getting those photons reflecting off surfaces and maybe even some direct light if you're lucky, like a sunset, it offsets the negative effects of light in the middle of the night. And that effect is quite long. This is a beautiful paper that was published in Scientific Reports that shows that it protects you against some of the negative effects of artificial light in the middle of the night. Anyway, if you do two or three of those things on a regular basis, just like if you follow a relatively healthy diet, that means different things to different people. But since, everyone's got their concept of what that is, if you do most of the right things most of the time, you're going to do far better on sleep, wakefulness, mood, immune system, metabolism, blood sugar regulation, focus. I mean, it's a foundational layer of health. And I wish we heard more about it out there, but there's so much science to support it now. And it's very easy. And it's all cost free if you think about it. There's not a single item that you need.
And that's the beauty of you coming on and talking about this. And I've heard you in other interviews talk about it to the extent that people have said, what's the one thing that you would do or recommend? And you've shared that getting light in the morning is the one thing that I'd recommend for people for their health, because often sometimes it's in the nature of sometimes very brilliant people that we've had on the podcast and functional medicine doctors who naturally know a lot and work with very complicated patients who have a lot going on. And it can feel like we have to do all these components. We have to make sure that caffeine doesn't happen at this time. We have to make sure that we don't eat late. We have to make sure this. And then for somebody who's just getting started out, they may feel, or sometimes people have done all those and feel like they can't maintain the habits of those successfully. I do think it's important to talk about prioritization and the prioritization of something that they could try that's available to them that has cascading effects throughout the day, so that we can get the biggest bang that's there. The goal is we study all this information for most of us here who didn't go to school for this, don't have a degree for this, which is me and most of my audience that's listening. We study it so that we don't have to think about it later on, so that we can have our health to give love and attention to all the things that we care about in life, which means volunteering for our local church or community or whatever it might be, or giving back or raising awareness about a subject that's there. So knowing where to put that priority and to try it to see if it can work for us, I do think is a great distinction. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Sure. No, you're making an excellent point. Like, what are the few things that are really going to move the needle? And I think morning light is that thing when it comes to nervous system function and health overall. We've heard so many things about, people should be doing crossword puzzles and, things and, keep their memory into old age. And these light behaviors are foundational. They set the stage for everything else. Try hard to get that 2 to 10 minutes of light outside. Ideally do it walking, because that would be even better. You get a little bit of optic flow. People who work shift work and work nights, This is an interesting one. The 3 recommendations I can make really quickly, and then it's probably a whole other discussion on shift work, but try and stay on the same schedule for 2 weeks or more at a time. These systems get really disrupted when you're nocturnal, then you're diurnal, you're up in the day, you're working the day, then you're sleeping at night. If you're working the night shift, still try and see the sunrise or get some light in your eyes in the morning and in the evening. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to give your biology, all these cells in your body, you're trying to anchor them to something consistent. And what's the most consistent thing in the universe, at least from the perspective of a human, is this 24-hour spin of the earth. Meal timing, some people find, you can anchor to meal timing, trying to keep meal timing consistent, but that gets hard, especially if you have kids, demanding schedule, whatever it is. Meal timing can get tricky. So light is the primary timekeeper for all the cells in your body. And when I say all the cells, I mean even the gene expression patterns are regulated by these circadian clock genes. And so see the morning light, see the evening light. If you have a weird, really wonky schedule, people always say, should I wake up just to see the sunrise or the sunlight? Probably. I mean, provided you can go back to sleep, you want to give your brain and your nervous system as many cues as they can. So it's sort of like, I don't personally do intermittent fasting, but I don't eat while I'm sleeping. And I don't eat early when I wake up because I'm just not hungry. It's sort of like in the world of nutrition, there's a lot of argument about what macronutrient ratios are ideal for, carnivore, vegan, balanced, whatever. There's a lot of discussion about this outside my wheelhouse. But what I think is interesting about the concept of circadian timed eating, or intermittent fasting, it's sometimes called, is that it sort of anchors things around a few core behaviors, and then a lot of other things stem from it. And I look at light viewing in the morning as equivalent to that. It sets the stage for a lot of other things to work correctly, and it cues your attention, but it doesn't overwhelm your attention. So like you said, you can focus on the other things you need to do. You're not biohacking all day long and all night, just trying to get everything right, because then you don't want a life where you're just trying to tune yourself all the time. You want to use this body and mind to go do something powerful in the world. If you're a professional biohacker and that's what you get paid for, you're the exception, not the rule. For the rest of us, we want to feel great, be healthy, and know we're doing the right things without having to invest a ton of time and money and energy into it. And light viewing is that thing.
Your lab is known, amongst many things, one of your primary areas is studying fear. And there's this topic that comes up for a lot of people. In fact, it was a big question that people had after our part 1, which was fantastic. And it was around laziness and motivation. And for somebody who's struggling with laziness and motivation, what is it that they're missing out when it comes to how fear fits into those two as drivers, for good or for worse?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We don't often think about motivation and fear as in the same breath or the same sentence. We are accustomed to thinking about the fact that when we're afraid of something, we can freeze up. But really, motivation and fear are in the same pathway. And believe it or not, they're in the same chemical pathway. So the only way to talk about motivation is to talk about the molecule dopamine. Dopamine is known for its feel-good properties. We think, a dopamine hit, or, it feels so good, a rush of dopamine. But dopamine's main role in the brain and body is craving, motivation, and pursuit. Okay. And in the absence of dopamine, we don't feel motivated. I'll describe in a moment a classic experiment that illustrates this beautifully. But dopamine's main role is to make us feel motivated and to crave things. Okay. And the interesting thing is that dopamine is the chemical, it's the molecule from which another molecule is made called epinephrine. And epinephrine has another name, which is adrenaline. So to untangle all that, basically, craving and desire is the foundation of stress and fear. And people think, well, how could that possibly be? Well, stress and fear comes from adrenaline. So the way to think about this in a kind of real world context is that when we are afraid of something, we have one of 3 responses. We can either remain still, we can retreat, or we can move forward. all three of those require some increase in our level of activation. And the molecule adrenaline, also called epinephrine, I probably will use those interchangeably, so it really doesn't matter, adrenaline, epinephrine. That is what's responsible for getting us moving. It's also responsible for our sense of fear and paralysis in fear. So if people are feeling that they're not motivated or as motivated as they would like to be, there's a key step that people need to take, which is to start focusing on the craving aspect and dopamine. Because if you can make enough dopamine, you can motivate, you can actually crave moving through challenge. So we can talk about how to do that. But just to underscore how powerful this relationship is between motivation and dopamine, there was an experiment that was done. It's been done in rats, but it's also essentially been done in humans through naturally occurring things, where basically if you put a rat next to a lever with some juice or even with something really, really good that a rat likes, they will press that lever for that delicious tasting thing. And they get pleasure from it. But if you take a rat and you deplete it of dopamine and you move that lever one rat length away, it won't even move one length of its own body, right? A few inches to hit that lever. And people are the same way. You can still experience pleasure without dopamine, but you won't get up off your couch. You won't challenge yourself to go talk to somebody you want to talk to. You won't apply for a job. You won't pursue the new, fitness protocol, etc. So dopamine is about craving of pleasure. It's not pleasure itself. And fear comes from this pathway, right? This pathway of dopamine into epinephrine. And the way to think about fear is it's just one other dimension of motivation. And we can talk more about that. But if people are living in fear, it is absolutely essential to understand that developing some sense of craving, even if it feels scary, wanting something but being afraid to pursue it, that's the trigger for these molecules to start being released and to move towards it. But we've all sort of been told or conditioned that if we feel fearful, that that's a sign that we should back away or stand still. And biologically, that's just not true. So if people are feeling paralyzed in fear, or they are feeling as if they, are unmotivated, it's absolutely essential that they identify some kernel, some little bit of something that draws them forward. And if they feel that agitation, the kind of elevated heart rate, the anxiety, a little bit of sweating, this kind of thing, just imagining that they want that thing, that's great. Those are the molecules that I'm talking about starting to kick into gear. But for some reason, most people start feeling those sensations and they start freezing up or backing away. I hope that was clear.
It was definitely clear. So I guess the question is, do you think that fear is the primary driver for people who are feeling lazy and unmotivated?
I do. I mean, there are two sides to this. I mean, and you see this a lot in the kind of psychological discussion around motivation. It's, it's wonderful to think about moving towards things purely from a place of love and joy, and we feel that and we experience that with a child or with a puppy, or when we hear suddenly, music that we love, we feel that these same molecules are liberated into our body and brain, and we feel that positive motivation. But I think and that's beautiful, and that's a wonderful dimension of life. But I think that it's a mistake to assume that that's how it's going to feel to pursue the everything. And the other side of this is that when there's fear, where you can also be quite motivated. I think we're so averse to the idea of pursuing things out of fear. Should someone start running? I'll use myself as an example. I'll embarrass myself by saying, I read recently that the guidelines for physical fitness and cardiovascular health, because I'm 45, I'm like, I should probably start thinking about my heart health. I feel healthy, but it's 150 minutes per week of elevated heart rate, of that cardiovascular exercise, which I haven't been doing at all. I do other things, but I just haven't been doing that at all. And I always enjoy it once I'm doing it regularly, but the first couple of weeks are painful. This little back thing, and then, all the stuff crops up. But basically, I'm doing it out of fear, right? I don't want to die of a heart attack. And if you look at the numbers, if you're not getting 150 minutes a week minimum of cardiovascular exercise, your probability of having a cardiovascular incident goes way up. And you can pretend it's not going to happen because of your genetics, or you can do all sorts of, mental gymnastics. But the reality is that everyone should be getting that minimum, including me. And I wasn't. So fear is the motivator in that case. So fear is a terrific motivator. And I think that we're so afraid of things like adrenal burnout or chronic stress. And those things are problematic for many people. But I think that fear itself is a tremendously powerful lever. And when I say a lever, I mean a chemical lever. This dopamine epinephrine relationship, the fact that dopamine, this molecule of craving, and epinephrine, this molecule of motivation and agitation, this kind of like stress, the fact that those are such close cousins is never going to be untangled. And so the doing a lot of psychological work to try and just move towards things from a place of love and desire, I think is a terrible mistake. I think that eventually comes, and it's wonderful to have those aspects to one's life. But I think we should all be in more appreciation for the fact that we are wired to be motivated when afraid, and we can leverage that. I'm not talking about living in fear all the time, but I think that we can leverage that. It's what can get us out the door. It's what can move us through tremendously difficult times. So I guess I'm not out to turn fear into something it's not. It doesn't feel good to turn stress and agitation into something it's not. It's called stress and agitation for a reason, but I don't think that it's poison. I think it's the way I like to think about it. Again, I'm calling it a lever because, a lever, you can really move things forward. And then once things are going forward, it's a whole different business. And we could talk about that as well.
So it sounds like the distinction is kind of undirected fear, which is what a lot of people are going through. Just this undirected fear, their mind meandering, wandering, imagining worst case scenarios, but not really, to compare that to directed fear. Like you're really talking about, directing your fear, channeling it, maybe even, I don't know, visualizing it. Would that be an opportunity? Would that be a practice that somebody could use to actually use their fuel as fear in their life?
Yeah,
use their fear as fuel in their life?
Yeah, I do think fear can be fuel, and it's very powerful fuel. I think that I like the idea actually of using it as a visualization. I think that if you look at the trauma literature, one of the things that we know is that trauma has many different aspects to it, but one of the hallmarks of trauma is two things really. One is a confusion about who's responsible. This is often the case. The brain somehow gets confused about who is responsible for something terrible. Even though we know rationally that wasn't my fault, we still, it's like almost like the nervous system is trying to resolve something. And we get this kind of reverberation of all the terrible feelings. And the other thing that's been shown time and time again is that people really need to not hide from that experience. They need to be able to confront the memory of the experience or the person of the or whatever it was. And of course that should be done in a clinical setting if it's something very severe. But, we've all probably, or at least in California, we've heard of, there's like love and kindness meditation where people will do a meditation specifically aimed towards cultivating a sense of gratitude, which is a beautiful and wonderful practice. It's actually associated with the liberation of a different molecule, serotonin, which makes us feel good about what we have. Serotonin is sort of the molecule satiety of feeling like we have enough in our immediate experience. Dopamine and adrenaline are really about moving forward or away from things. It's about not feeling comfortable where you're at, either because you're craving or because you're afraid, right? So these molecules are interesting because they really do kind of separate themselves into different psychologies, if you will. So I could imagine taking on a practice where one sits down and focuses their mind on something that they want. So craving, this is not very Zen sounding, right? You're supposed to be separate from desires, but really focusing on something that you very much want or that you very much fear, but is in line with something that is probably good for you. And I imagine that meditation or focus or visualization would liberate these molecules. The brain, visualization is powerful, and the brain will make efforts to take a visualization and start creating the chemicals inside that mimic the real experience. And so that's why the kind of gratitude practices are so powerful. That's why focusing on something that we really want, it feels exciting. That excitement is the liberation of these molecules. trying. I mean, these cells, they don't have their own mind, but it's a biological strategy to get you to move, to literally to get you out of your chair and move. And I think that it brings up a larger theme, which is that, the reason we have a brain is to move this thing that we call a body, right? Animals that, like us, we are animals that can move in lots of different ways, run, jump, swim, push-ups, dance. The variety of movements that we can do is one of the reasons we have such a big brain. And these molecules, they sound kind of complicated, but they're actually really pretty simple. Dopamine is about craving, motivation, and pursuit. Epinephrine is really about agitation and endurance to get you to persist. Serotonin is really about feeling good about what you have. We hear so much about oxytocin and but oxytocin and serotonin they work together. They collaborate to make you feel good when you hold your child, or when you feel like, maybe if you've ever had this experience of being at with a group of friends or a party, and you look around and you're like, I'm so blessed. I'm so lucky to have these people, right? Or to have this roof over my head. Those are molecular events. And then there's a fourth neuromodulator, which is acetylcholine, which is really about focus. But I would say all of these molecules are applicable. They can be plugged into a visualization practice. This is something that could be done for 5 minutes a day of just turning off or flipping over the phone and thinking about something in a very directed way, and just watching how that makes you feel. If it makes you feel agitated, if it makes you feel good, if it makes you feel a sense of desire, those actually would be powerful practices, because it would give you a window into what's happening neurochemically. And most people get this backwards. They sit around and they go, I don't have enough dopamine. Like, what do I need to increase my dopamine? I get this all the time. What should I take to increase my dopamine? And there are things you can take, supplements you can take to increase dopamine. And if you do that, you will feel a lift. This is true, right? There are antidepressants and other molecules you can take to increase your serotonin. Some people just take serotonin. You can now go, at least in the United States, it's legal to go buy the precursor to serotonin. You can do that. And you will feel better about what you have temporarily. But I'm always a fan, unless there's a real clinical need, of looking at behavioral and mental tools first, then looking at the power of supplementation and nutrition, which are real and can be leveraged. And then if there's a clinical need towards prescription drugs, for which certain people, they can be of real benefit. But I love the idea of a fear meditation. Yeah.
Well, it's pretty common in the Buddhist tradition. They'll have meditate on your death, or in the Stoic tradition, they'll have imagine the worst case scenario and really visualize it through.
I guess I've only heard the California version.
Yeah, you've only heard
the California version. Which is go to Esalen and just and really enjoy the bliss of life, which is a great practice. But I like actually, I think it's important. I think what you're saying is important for people to understand that there's a lot of, it sounds like there's a lot of dimensionality to meditation. It's not just about being relaxed and calm and in gratitude. It's about confronting your inner real estate. And that's really cool.
And that could even be, what am I missing out on in life? Or how am I not going to be able to serve people if I don't rise to the occasion? There's so many aspects where you see this online sometimes. There's the feeling of, I'm only living my quote unquote authentic self if it feels good. And, in our first, I'm only going to work on stuff that feels good. And a first part of our conversation was actually a lot of stuff doesn't feel good. And you want to embrace that, because that's how you get good at doing things. Right. So I think in that same sense, meditating on stuff that doesn't feel good sometimes, like one of the most motivating, reoccurring dreams I have is I'm back in high school, and I did great in high school, but I really despised, being there. And I felt like it was very limiting, and I couldn't, study the stuff that I wanted to do. And I feel like I'm back in high school, but something happened, and I'm still my current age, right? I'm like 38 right now. And I'm 38, but at some reason I'm back in high school, and I'm like, holy shit, I had all these ambitions. I had all these dreams for stuff that I wanted to do. And for whatever reason, now I'm like studying trigonometry again, right? And I'm going through my whole day at class in high school, and I'm sitting in classes, and for some version I've been held back.
This is a dream, or this is a visualization? This
is a dream.
Okay.
This is a dream.
Yeah.
And then, because I'm also into lucid dreaming, some way through, I wake up and I'm like, okay, I'm in my high school. Okay, I have control. Wait, how did I get here? And I have this realization like, no, I'm living my life. I'm a grown human being. I'm an adult male who has started businesses and written stuff and has a podcast. And I feel so fired up that day because I just went through an entire visualization of being back in what my mind would deem to be a worst case scenario, which is being back in school, being held back for some sort of reason and not being able to do all the stuff that I want to. And I feel energized the entire rest of the day when I actually get a chance to wake up. So just another example of me personally feeling like visualizing, or whether it's a dream or meditating on your death or meditating on what you would miss out on life if you can't rise to the occasion or take care of your health or be there for the, your family in the way that you want to, can be a big motivator for things.
Yeah, it's interesting. The dreams, of course, for centuries, people have wondered about the significance of dreams, but it's very clear that in the early part of your night, your sleep and your dreaming is related mainly toward physical repair of the body and toward learning of motor skills. There's a predominance of what they call slow wave sleep or non-REM sleep, non-rapid eye movement sleep. In the later half of the night, toward morning, you shift over to having more REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And there's a heavier emotional load to those dreams. This is well established. What's interesting is that something is written into our biology, into the genome of everybody, where these emotionally laden dreams in the second half of the night, they're happening, but the body is incapable of releasing adrenaline. We're also paralyzed during REM sleep. We're what's called atonic, or, we have atonia. We're completely paralyzed, probably so that we don't act out our dreams, although no one really knows. As I always say, I wasn't consulted at the design phase, and no one else I know was either. So anyone that tells you why something is the way it is, should be a little bit suspect. But you have these dreams that are very emotionally intense, and yet you don't have adrenaline released into your system. And people who are deprived of that second half of the night dreams tend to have more emotionality during their day. Little things seem heavy. This seems to be a portion of our sleep that is a bit like trauma release therapy. In a lot of trauma release therapies, the idea, like EMDR or in just standard psychoanalysis and psychotherapy of various kinds, cognitive behavioral therapy, these are board certified, approved treatments, at least in the US and in other countries as well. It's all about recounting the event, but trying to uncouple the event from the negative emotion and the feeling of agitation. It's about really being able to get close, right up, in front of your face with the experience, and experiencing that, but being comfortable feeling it all without doing anything about it. And so in sleep, we experience this emotional fear. We have fear in our second half of the night dreams, but we can't do anything about it. So talk about, exposure therapy. We get that every night. Now, some people will wake up from those dreams and immediately the adrenaline system will kick on and it'll be, and you're just like, oh my goodness, that was so scary. That actually shows you have a healthy adrenaline system, that when you wake up, it's really immediately available. And a lot of people think, oh my God, that was such a dreadful dream or troubling dream. That was your brain trying to uncouple the emotionality of previous days' events and old events. And if you deprive people of that particular stage of sleep, they go through life feeling emotionally weighed down by their previous experiences. If you've ever been sleep deprived, the littlest things can seem heavy. You get 2 nights good sleep or 3 nights good sleep, the whole world looks different. It just looks better. It feels better. And so I find it fascinating. I didn't know we were going to go down this path because we started off by talking about, using fear as a tool to move through things and work through things and be motivated. And in your description of this dream about high school, it reminded me that in sleep, we have this process ongoing. And for people that are having the same dream over and over, it's probably the case that the body needs multiple cycles. The brain needs multiple cycles of this because it's so deeply wired into us, whatever it was. And for people with PTSD, a big part of the exposure therapies is to really bring, in a safe setting and in a clinical setting, obviously, to bring people to the point where the very worst thing they could possibly imagine it's almost as if it's happening. And then little by little, amount of adrenaline is turned down and turned down and turned down. People might be upset to hear this, but you never forget your traumatic experiences.
Totally. And that's for, as you've shared before, it's for a specific reason, right? Our brain wants to hold on to them, to file them,
right,
to protect us.
Right. But you can reframe the emotional component. You can unweight the emotional load. And this is why I think that sleep is so foundational. The great work of Matt Walker and the Stanford folks at the Stanford Sleep Clinic, and many others, of course, there are many great sleep scientists out there, have really unpacked this incredible period of our life we call sleep. What has not happened yet, and what is something that's very important to me and my lab's mission and many other labs also, is we need a taxonomy, a naming system for waking states. For sleep, we have REM and slow wave sleep. We know what the early night is for. We know what the second half of the night is for. We go through our waking life talking about things like happiness, sadness, depression, stress, anxiety, and fear, but it's all pretty vague. And I think one of the exciting things that's going to happen in the next 10 years or so, hopefully sooner, is that we're really going to start to understand what is creative work, what is focus, what is conversation, what is bonding, and really understand those things at a biological and psychological level, to the point where we can also, I don't really like the word hack, but that we will be able to pull apart the different components and really understand, maybe we should, I'm making this up, so please don't take this as a recommendation, but maybe we should all be focused on activities that increase our acetylcholine early in the day, and then we should gradually be turning that off. We all hear don't drink caffeine past 4 p.m., it messes with your sleep. Well, maybe there are things that we should be doing, for our waking states. And so one of the things that excites me now is that because of the unfortunate events of 2020, most people now are tuned into the fact that they have a brain and a body. They're very much connected, that we're all subject to stress, that we're all grappling with things and challenged. And I feel like the universality, is that a word? Yeah,
I think so.
Maybe I didn't get it. Someone always writes to me as corrects my speech at some point. The universality of our nervous system has really been presented to us. That things like resilience and motivation and trauma and fear, everybody struggles with these things. Everybody. And anyone who seems like they don't, or anyone that pretends like they don't, has got a different neurologic issue that we can talk about in a different episode.
And I think really one of the big things that you've been trying to bring to that space as a whole is, I think we've been doing a good job of, when I say we, I mean America primarily, and other, westernized countries, of putting more attention that these things are there. We don't have to hide, everybody's going through some version of it. So the answer is often, we need to increase access to mental health, right? It kind of goes about that far. And anybody who's seen what happened with the pandemic knows that our system is fragile. It's been fragile even before. There's not enough practitioners for everybody who needs mental health access. Insurance, at least in America, is a big issue. So we need other tools, right? And I just want to give gratitude to you, because your mission from the beginning has always been free tools, easily accessible, that anybody can do on their own. Within the context of that, I feel like yes, mental health access is important. That's part of the equation. But your through line seems to be, and please jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, that getting there through thoughts alone is not going to solve, help us get to the root issue, right? Mm-hmm. That can be part of it, but we actually need to embrace the behavior. You have this quote that I heard you share in another podcast, and it was trying to control the mind with the mind is like trying to grab at fog. Yeah. And I think this is a fundamental thing to bring up for the folks who are listening, is that when you are struggling with laziness, lack of motivation, you're stuck in fear, a lot of times, and you see this especially at night when people are trying to fall asleep, right, that their mind is so active and they're trying to tackle that through more mind. Right. And really what you would say is that, look, that's not wrong, but it may not get you there. So let's take that scenario, right? Sure. Give us the example. One way, if your mind is super active at night and you're trying to fall asleep, you're trying to invest in your sleep and get more of it or get better quality, but then everybody notices that their mind is very active. What would be a way of addressing that through behavior instead of ruminating and thinking, or even telling your mind, like, I just wish you would stop.
Yeah. So when that is very hard to control the mind with the mind. And I think a simple rule that people can adopt is when your mind is not where you want it to be, look to your body. Use the body to shift the mind. It's a simple equation. It's sometimes hard to do because thoughts can be so all encompassing. But when your mind is not where you want it to be, if you don't feel as happy or you're obsessing, you need to go to a mechanical system in the body, because if you do that, you'll shift the chemicals that are released in your brain in a way that will allow you to regain control of the steering wheel. So there are a couple things that can do that immediately. The most basic one and the simplest one is going to be with respiration, with breathing. So breathing and the neurons that control breathing are so interesting because they are constantly working. They work reflexively all the time. They're working right now. If you're alive and you're listening to this, they're working. But unlike a lot of aspects of our brain-body connection, we can grab a hold of it immediately and start tinkering with it. Like I can't say right now, hey, start digesting faster, Andrew, or tell my intestines, hey, slow down digestion, or I can't make my heart rate speed up just by telling it to, but I can slow down or speed up my breathing if I want to. So it lies at this bridge between the conscious and the unconscious mind. And I don't say this from any point or stance of philosophy. This is physiology. So if your mind is not where you want it to be, whether or not you're trying to sleep or work or focus or anything, I'm a big fan of this physiological sigh, which was discovered by physiologists in the 1930s. It's a double inhale through the nose and a long exhale that follows. The exhale can be done through the mouth or through the nose. If you're one of these people who can't breathe through your nose, you could do this all through your mouth. So it's just an inhale and then inhale again, even if you're just sneaking in a little bit more air, and then long exhale. The physiological sigh is known to physiologists and neuroscientists as a way to offload a lot of what's called carbon dioxide, and it immediately produces a heightened sense of calm or a reduced sense of stress and alertness. It's not going to put you to sleep right away, but I'll just do it just by way of example so people can see, since it always looks funny to breathe and, by example for some reason. And no, you don't have to close your eyes in order to breathe. You can breathe with your eyes open. So it's just, right? So it's inhale, inhale, long exhale. This physiological sigh is known to reinflate these little sacs in the lungs called the alveoli of the lungs. And then when you exhale, it offloads a lot of carbon dioxide, and that immediately reduces your levels of stress. Now, why am I recommending this? Well, if your mind is churning on something, maybe you're just obsessing, maybe you're not really stressed, maybe you're sad. But when you use respiration to kind of wedge in between your conscious and unconscious life, suddenly you realize that using something that's purely mechanical, your lungs, air, carbon dioxide, your mind shifts as well. And there are a lot of studies now, the best of which I think have been done by Jack Feldman, who's a professor at UCLA, who's worked his entire career basically on the physiology of breathing and the mind. The brain shifts, our states of mind shift, the chemistry of the brain starts to shift. But this physiological sigh is more about grabbing a hold of the steering wheel again. That's what it's really about. And then it's about what you do next. So if you're having a hard time falling asleep, there are a couple things you can do. One is to do exhale emphasized breathing and not try to fall asleep. Just focus on doing big inhales but even longer exhales. Doesn't matter if it's through the nose or the mouth. Extended exhales tend to shift the body into more what we call parasympathetic states, more relaxed states. Parasympathetic is just fancy language for the system of the body that controls calmness. It promotes calmness. Think of it like a brake, okay? There are two ways to slow down a car. One is to come off the accelerator. The other is to push on the brake. So long exhales are like pushing on the brake. Okay, now it's expected and it's totally normal that the brain will continue to ruminate if you're having trouble sleeping. After you've done that, and really what I just described probably takes about 5 to 30 seconds. I'm not talking about an extended breathwork protocol, just a physiological sigh to remind yourself, oh wait, I'm in control of this system that seems to be going off the rails on its own, or that I can't seem to control. The extended exhales tend to bring more calm to the system. I'm a big fan of using a tool to shift the body into sleep or sleep-like states. Insomnia is terrible. People trying to sleep when they can't is absolutely maddening. Better to try and encourage the body to relax in general and see if you can fall asleep later, not try and force yourself into sleep. So the two practices that work best for this is one goes by the Yoga Nidra. Many people have probably heard of.
You mentioned it last time.
Yeah.
By the way, can I interject about
Sure.
Yoga Nidra? I don't know if you and your team have looked at it, but if you look at some of the top Yoga Nidra videos and you go down to the comments, like some of the first comments are, Andrew Huberman brought me here. And then other people replying back and saying, yep, I'm here for the same reason. So the word's getting out there and a lot of people are watching these YouTube videos.
Oh, that's very gratifying to hear. Yeah, I have no business relationship to Yoga Nidra. It has been developed, centuries before I was even born. It means yoga sleep. You just lie down, you listen to one of these scripts. They're available on YouTube as free, totally cost free. They tend to walk you through a set of visualizations and a set of breathing protocols that essentially turn the mind off. All right. This is it essentially accomplishes what a couple stiff alcoholic drinks will do, which will also turn off your forebrain. The problem is it has other issues that go with it. And many people who use alcohol to try and calm down have a rebound increase in anxiety. I can always spot anxious people and people that have chronic anxiety by the way that they drink and the way that they need a drink. Anyone tells me I need a drink, I know they're not good at regulating their nervous system. I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, but it says to me, it's somebody that it's sort of like saying, I need an Uber driver. I'm like, you don't really know how to drive, or like it's if you need one, right? If you need a chauffeur, right? It's nice to have one sometimes, sure. Right? But if you need one, there's a problem, right? So Yoga Nidra is a wonderful practice. The other thing that's wonderful and that now there's a lot of good data on is hypnosis. So one of the things I've become increasingly interested in is hypnosis because I have a collaborator by the name of David Spiegel. He's an MD PhD. He's our associate chair of psychiatry at Stanford. And he's used hypnosis to great effect for smoking cessation, pain management. Breast cancer outcomes are greatly improved by the sorts of hypnosis he's done with his patients, and for sleep and other things. And there's a wonderful resource that I'm happy to point people to. It's a free resource, which is an app for Android and Apple called Reverie, Reveri. You can go to reverie.com, download that. It's a hypnosis app where you can hear David's voice. He has a very hypnotic voice. And he walks you through, you can pick a hypnosis for sleep or for pain management. They've even got some now to improve focus for work. Hypnosis is a very interesting practice because it incorporates a lot of the same things we've been talking about, a shift in breathing, it involves a lot of stuff with the eyes, which is my lab's interest. And when you talk about why they have you look up and try and close your eyes and all this stuff, that's not magician stuff. It's not sorcery. It has to do with the relationship between the eyes and the so-called autonomic nervous system. In any case, hypnosis is a wonderful tool because it shifts the brain and body very quickly into desired states of focus, states of relaxation, states of reduced craving, etc. And a lot of people are afraid of hypnosis. I wish it had a different name because clinical hypnosis is nothing like stage hypnosis. You are in control. It's about you shifting over what's called the default mode network, this kind of the idle, a transmission that's screwed up. Well, if you get in your car and you turn it on, all of a sudden it's redlining, just standing still, that the RPMs are way up, then there's a problem with the transmission. The hypnosis is really about adjusting that idle level, bringing about a sense of focus and a sense of control over your nervous system. So I would say Yoga Nidra, first physiological side, that should be people's anchor point. Just pull back into the control over your nervous system and your mind. Once you've done that, you can tell yourself, because you have, that you've intervened with what felt like something that was out of your control, your thoughts. At that point, some long exhales, breathing for maybe 20 seconds or so, no big deal. And then I would reach to either a Yoga Nidra script or a hypnosis script. And of course, there are things that people can take. Drinking too much caffeine late in the day can make it hard to fall asleep. I personally, and this is just me, if I don't have enough starchy carbohydrates late in the day, I have a hard time falling asleep because they are precursors to tryptophan and serotonin. So I'm not a big, some people on very low carbohydrate diets struggle to fall asleep. So I push my carbohydrates toward later in the day, for instance. And then there are supplements that many people find beneficial. I'm personally not a big fan of melatonin because people tend to take far too much of it relative to the normal physiological levels. And it has some other issues. But things like magnesium biglycinate or magnesium threonate, theanine, apigenin, which is chamomile tea. But if you don't want to do the supplement thing, and I fully respect if people are averse to that, pills and that sort of thing, chamomile tea is great. It has something called apigenin, which turns on, for you aficionados out there, it turns on a chloride channel system in the forebrain. It basically helps shut down thinking to go to sleep. It mellows you out. That's a real effect. And so there are a number of things that people can do. And sleeping is a skill. You get good at it. Do you need blackout curtains? Well, some people have thin eyelids. Some people have thick eyelids. I have thin eyelids. I mean, light goes on even with my eyes closed and it like wakes me up. Some people, no problem. So sleep masks, blackout curtains. I don't think people should become obsessive about sleep. What you want to do is develop some sleep practices. And the core ones are recognizing early in the evening that you're shifting towards sleep and starting to prepare for it the same way you would prepare for school or work or a workout, and not thinking that you can just go and then have a perfect night's sleep. And so those are the things. Always behaviors first. Then, in my opinion, then look to nutrition supplementation. And then if someone has a real clinical need, and they should see a sleep specialist. And there are drugs that will help people sleep. But I think the vast majority of people that are taking prescription drugs to sleep don't need them, or put differently, could achieve different, if not better effects doing other things. I'm a big proponent of a practice that some people call yoga nidra, NIDRA, which involves lying down and just listening to a sort of like a relaxation script. I do this for 10 to 30 minutes a day for two reasons. One is it gets you better at relaxing and it makes you a better sleeper, makes it easier to fall and stay asleep. The other reason is there was a study done at University of Copenhagen in Denmark showing that these 10 to 30 minute deep relaxation bouts, which are not meditation, you're not focusing on anything, you're actively unfocusing, in fact, they can enhance some of the dopamine in the brain circuits that are useful for action and action planning and learning. And so if I don't sleep well, I'll do a 30-minute yoga nidra first thing when I wake up, or sometimes in the afternoon. I find it very restorative. I fundamentally disagree with my colleagues that you can't restore sleep that you missed. I don't know about restoring the sleep state, but I know that cognitive function can be enhanced and even restored by these periods of deep rest, which are different than meditation. If you're interested in this, that you just put into YouTube. There are a number of apps out there. There are a lot of different scripts. Some people like one voice or another. I happen to like the voice of, her last name is Desai, Desai. And she has an app as well. But if you go to YouTube and you say Yoga Nidra, Desai, there are a bunch of scripts. Some are 10 minutes, some are 30 minutes. They involve a little bit of the kind of, let's be fair, sort of new agey kind of language around that's kind of puts off certain people. But really all it is deep relaxation. And that has been shown to enhance these neurochemicals, which can enhance the neuroplasticity process. So sleep is always best. But if you can't sleep, sometimes doing these deep relaxation scripts can be almost as good.
And is there a time of day for yourself? Is there a time of day that you'll find that you'll want to bring it in? Is it like 2:00 after kind of like a lot of activity and what time do you bring it in to enhance in your sort of flow? Or do you call upon it when you're finding yourself like a little stressed out, a little bit sort of pulled in different directions, a little bit like hard to focus? How do you tap into that toolbox?
Yeah, I do 5 nidras a week, 10 to 30 minutes each. If I haven't slept, if I wake up and I don't feel rested, I don't have the luxury, unfortunately, of just going back to sleep most of the time. So I'll do a 30-minute or a 10-minute, one of these deep relaxation scripts. And I swear I wake up, I come out of that. Sometimes I fall asleep during it, sometimes I don't, but I come out of that feeling completely ready to go. That's my experience. We've studied this in my lab, and people go into very deep states of relaxation and brain waves that mimic sleep. If in the afternoon I'm feeling groggy, I might do it in the afternoon. And if I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm ruminating and I'm having a hard time turning off my mind and I can't sleep, I will do this instead.
So it's not a set time each day. It's more that you're calling upon it if there's a feeling of, I'm not feeling as alert or as rested as I would normally feel at my baseline right now.
That's right. And I have a friend, his name is Ryan Suave. who's doing really incredible work in the trauma and addiction community. He's a trauma therapist and board certified therapist, using Nidra as a component of the treatment for trauma and addiction. And of course, there are other components to those treatments, but for people that are interested in trauma release and are working through things, whether or not it's because of plasticity or restoration of these neurochemicals, he's had tremendously positive results. We're actually thinking about running a study with an inpatient population that he works with out in Colorado. My lab studied this process. For me, it's also just easier than meditation, because meditation involves concentration, and I'm spending most of the day trying to concentrate. Along those lines about focus, a lot of people say, like, what are your tools for focus? So I'll just mention that the things that I do that you may or may not find useful. Okay, so they range from pretty extreme to rather benign. When I was in college, no joke, I actually used to chain myself to my chair. We didn't have phones back then. And I would throw the key across the room to the point where I would have to drag my chair across the room in order to unlock myself. My goal at that time was to get through large volumes of reading, and there was a lot of memorization, and I found myself just getting way too distracted, and I would try and find the right amount of coffee. It didn't make sense to listen to mellow music or like really intense music, and it was so variable that finally what I found was, basically I'm going to just take this to the extreme and just chain myself to the chair. That's a little extreme. I was 19 years old then. I'm not sure I recommend that, and also it's a fire hazard, I guess, if you had to get out quick. Nowadays, I confess that I lock my phone in a gun safe. This has nothing to do with firearms. It's just that it has a timer on it. So you can actually time the safe, and I just lock it in there. And I turn on a program on the internet, a Freedom, that just shuts down my internet access. And I write down anything that I want to look up later. And I will be honest, I hate this process. It is painful. It creates a ton of anxiety. Being away from the phone promotes anxiety. I get it. But what I find is I can accomplish more in a 60-minute bout of no distraction than I can in 2 days of broken work. So that's what I do. A lot of people have asked, like, what about diet and supplementation? For me, being a little bit hungry actually helps me focus. But if I'm too hungry, obviously, then I'm going to think about food. I love to eat. So I'll generally capture that mid-morning session as a key time, and then I eat after that. And my lab doesn't work on supplementation. I just want to be fair. Always, of course, check with your doctor. I'm not promoting supplementation, but I think there are a few things that can enhance focus for occasional use that are much safer than most of the stuff that people are out there using. People look to powerful stimulants. I drink caffeine. So hydration and caffeine work very well to enhance focus. A lot of people overdo the caffeine part, but they don't overdo the hydration
cliff
part.
As you were talking about earlier, like where they get so jittery, they can't focus. And now the caffeine is no longer playing the role that it could play in potentially helping them a little bit in the morning.
That's right. 4-to-1 volume of water to caffeine is what I actually do. And a lot of people say, well, then you have to go to the bathroom all the time. Well, this is kind of fun because then we can get right back into brain circuits. So there are several studies that have shown that the reason you wake up in the middle of the night when you have to urinate, when you have to go to the bathroom, is because there's actually a circuit, neurons that connect your bladder to your brainstem and wake up your brain. This is when kids are really young and these circuits aren't developed. This is why they wet their beds when they're really little. So that circuit wakes you up. And believe it or not, there are communities of first responders, and people in certain areas doing certain kinds of military work and whatnot, that understand that hydration, part of the reason it makes you alert is because of the cellular hydration. We hear 70% or whatever your brain is and body are water. A lot of the alertness that you get from hydration is also because your bladder is full and it stimulates alertness.
Wow.
Now,
that I haven't heard before, but that's amazing.
But you've experienced this, right? If
We've all
you've ever
experienced
had
it. Yeah.
I mean, when someone really has to go to the bathroom, it's downright stressful. It's agitation.
Think about a road trip. You're on a road trip. You got to pee. There's not a place that's in sight. You are alert, even if it's later in the evening when you might be a little bit tired from having driven the whole day.
It can pull you out of deep sleep. So it's weird because it's it's not a very elegant tool, but hydration and caffeine can work together. And then there are some supplements like L-tyrosine, which is a dopamine precursor. Those can, for occasional use, can bring about like heightened levels of focus and mood. However, I would caution most people about taking anything too close to the molecule you're trying to create. So for people that they're like, oh, I want more serotonin, I'm going to take 5-HTP. I recommend against that because you start to short circuit your own natural production of 5-HTP.
Your body feels like it's regularly coming in, so it's not going to, it feels like it's compensating permanently with that item.
That's right. Just like people who take testosterone, right? They shut down their own gonadal production. That's well known because the bloodstream, there's so much of it in the bloodstream, they don't need to make their own. So I think with dopamine, it's kind of scary to me. Nowadays, you can go to the health food store, go on Amazon and buy L-Dopa. It's called mecunopurines. And it's basically 99% L-Dopa. That will give you a very strong effect in the short term, but you're going to feel a real crash for a couple of days afterwards because you're going to deplete your dopamine. Things like L-tyrosine are the precursor, the amino acid precursor to dopamine, and there are a few steps in between. So the further away you are from the molecule that you're trying to create, the safer you are. Now, the furthest away that you can get is behaviors. So the self-reward mechanisms we talked about earlier, or some timed intermittent fasting to increase adrenaline. Remember that deer that was hungry because it was searching? You're making yourself a little bit hungry, which can bring about some alertness, not too much hunger that you're so stressed about food that you can't think about your work. You drinking water, so you're getting those signals from the bladder to the brainstem, as well as cellular hydration and alertness at the brain level. So you can start to create tools that converge. And the beauty of doing that with tools that are they're pretty benign tools, right? I mean, none of this is a prescription drug. None of this is a really intense practice. Yoga Nidra is 10 to 30 minutes, light viewing in the morning. You can start to see these things start to weave together in kind of what I call a neural circuit basis for kind of wellness and performance. It's based on neural circuits in the brain and in the body. And if you want to get a little more extreme with the behaviors, go for it. There have been times in my life, I haven't done this recently, where I would draw a little crosshatch on a piece of paper, put it up across the room, set a timer, and see how long I could keep my concentration on it. I do allow myself to blink. It's not easy, but you can build up to 10 or 15 minutes, and that can immediately transfer to a work bout. And the reason is we go back to the eyes, the beginning of our discussion. Your eyes were designed to focus, obviously, your visual world. The lens moves, and you can do all these things to focus your visual world, and that brings about a mental focus. A lot of people don't appreciate the extent to which our sensory environment is what we should use to guide our focus. Just sitting there and going, focus, 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 focus from the inside out doesn't really work so well. It's hard to control your mind with your mind, but you can control your mind with behaviors. You can control your mind with visual input. You can control your body and your mind through these neurochemical systems. And the entry points to doing that are vision, sometimes conscious breathing, some mindset work like positive rewards and these kinds of things are good. Light, light, smell, touch. These are the ligands, the things that attach to receptors in the body that create our states of mind. And you ultimately are in control of those. And so it's been fun and refreshing for me in the last couple of years to spend so much time with folks from the wellness community, because fortunately in 2020, that wellness community is populated, with a lot of kind of crazy ideas, but also some people like yourself, like Mark, people like Sachin, David Sinclair, other people who think about how to integrate the science with these things that for a long time existed purely as psychological concepts or even spiritual concepts. And the spiritual and psychological is beautiful. I think we should tip our hats to those communities for landing the Eckhart Tolles, for putting this stuff on the table. Science can point to protocols that most likely are going to give us the biggest effects. That's how I view it. And
also with so much focus on access and inclusion, we also need tools that can scale, that many people can get a chance to do. And there's nothing more basic than our access to light, breathing, the ability to take rest. These are things that everybody can do that have profound effects that don't require them to reach deep in their pockets to pay for things that they may not have access to. And I think that those tools are just so important. And when you look at a lot of people that are out of balance, that are trying to address some aspect of their life, it's always that, a good functional medicine doctor or a practitioner will look at them and just start off with the basics, because as much as we all think that we are practicing the basics, we are very much not because our world and the way that technology interplays with that world is so designed to pull us out of attempting those basics. And if we haven't addressed those basics that are there, looking at light in the morning, thinking about our breathing, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. We'll probably have to say that for a round 2 when we have you back on. We could probably do an entire podcast just on breathing and respiration alone and how that can play a role in focus and so many other aspects, including regulating our nervous system. But all in all, I guess really what I'm trying to say is that these tools are the foundational things that we can all remember and remind ourselves that play a crucial role with our daily experience of the world. We forget sometimes that we weren't here and then the world came. The world was here and our body designed its DNA, its cellular biology, its nervous system around the existing planet that was there. So we are a byproduct of that. We have to live in harmony with it.
Yeah, extremely well put. It's beautiful. I was really enjoying hearing you say that because I in all these years, I really haven't thought about that order of operations, but that's exactly right. The nervous system was shaped on the anvil of the earth, if you will, like in the environment of the earth. And it has these capacities to be customized based on specific childhoods and habitats, because a big part of the brain is to adapt to whatever it is that it experiences early in life, but has this feature of adult plasticity that, is a real thing. Everyone has access to that. Everybody has access to that. There's no person that has hyperplasticity and there are no people that don't have access to plasticity. Everyone has access to plasticity. And sometimes the gates to plasticity, which are, remember, their alertness, focus, and then later rest. Some people have an easier time with the alertness and focus part and a harder time with the rest part. Nobody's great at those across the board. Immediately, they take some practice and it's totally doable. It takes a little bit of time commitment. I'm glad that you mentioned inclusion and low cost or no cost. Obviously this is so crucial now to scale out and get tools out to people, to get everybody. One of the things that I maybe this is an ask, we'll call it what it is. It's an ask. In the scientific community and in laboratories, we have something we call watch one, do one, teach one, where you watch somebody do a procedure, then you do it. Usually you do a lot of them, and then you teach it. And, I'm delighted the opportunity to be here and to share, and on Instagram and to share. I'm so thrilled that there are platforms like this one that you do. But I think that, there are large communities that still don't hear about this kind of stuff, not just the things I'm talking about, but all of it. And especially what you just mentioned, which was beautiful. And I think it's important that as we try tools and we adapt those tools and into our life and we find what works for us, it's important that we also hand off those tools to people that we care about and to teach as many people as we can. This is one of the reasons why I don't have a bone to pick with named protocols, but one of the reasons I really try and emphasize the physiological and neuroscience principles underneath the stuff like light viewing and I don't call them like, my dog's name is Costello. I don't call them the Costello principles or something, is because then they become vaulted in something that is further away from the meaning and the sort of underlying mechanism. Of course, a ton of mechanism is confusing too. So I want to just encourage people to try tools, because hearing about them is great, but try them, find what works for you, what doesn't work for you, adapt them and share them. And it's okay to not know all the science behind them. If you want to learn more about the science, by all means, learn it. But I think watch one, do one, teach one could do a lot for wellness and health in society, because people largely learn through word of mouth. Mm-hmm. And right now there is deep confusion, understandable confusion about who the experts are. We don't know who to trust nowadays. And there are a lot of opinions in the room, and degrees help, but they're not everything, right? There are a lot of people with degrees who look very unhealthy. I've had dentists with very bad teeth. I generally don't stay with those dentists. So, there are people who have no degrees who know a tremendous amount. And so I think bringing people together is great, increasing the conversation, but watch one, do one, teach one, or watch one, do many, teach. And look, Mother Nature is the pattern, everything I've talked about today, right? I don't need anything from this because I didn't invent any of this. Mother Nature built this for us. Mother Nature, God, the universe, whatever your beliefs and leanings are, I support those. The important thing to understand is that the patent doesn't belong to human beings. It doesn't even belong to humanity. It was, like you said, we were sculpted on this stuff. And so I think teaching and passing along tools is the next big step especially for underprivileged populations, but really for everybody.
I want to just like highlight something you said, because I think this is going to be a big aha moment for people, is that, you know, we're constantly seeking freedom in our life, but actually you can get like structure is one of the best ways to create that freedom. Like, think about it. You know, you make the joke and say that you guys are a bunch of like feral animals. You had all the freedom in the world. You could do anything at that time, but that wasn't necessarily getting you maybe the results that you wanted. And through creating structure, there was another type of freedom that you opened up in life. And I think that in anything that people want to pursue, health, focus, as we talked about a bunch in your last podcast episode, a business goal, whatever you want to do, what does that structure look like that you can bring to your world? And not only to create results, but to open up freedom into not having to think about it in a way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I've, to this day, I struggle with structure, especially as more, if people out there think that the moment you start achieving some success, that things are going to get easier, it gets worse. There are more opportunities, and therefore your structure gets disrupted. More email, more texts come in, more amazing possible relationships and places to eat and things to do. It actually starts to undermine the whole process if you're not careful. And that's coming from somebody who, you know, I'm fortunate to not have substance abuse tendencies and things of that sort, but I still have a list, and now I make it every day, because when I just put it next to me and I didn't write it out, it didn't work. But it literally starts: dog walk number 1, get sun. I mean, like really basic stuff. I mean, I basically have to handhold myself in the same way that I talk about protocols on podcasts and that we're talking about here. I talk to myself that way as well. You know, get sunlight. Then I do a 90-minute work block, which means I use the program Freedom on the computer. No internet, no phone. I turn off the phone. I put it in my car. Sometimes it's really bad. I mean, the phone it's such a pull. Ask me for some code to get into something, and then I think I need the phone. Next thing I'm doing something else. So 90-minute work block. But what's beautiful is that the nervous system, and I don't know the underlying basis of this, but the nervous system has this feature to it where when we take the chaos of choice and we restrict ourselves to one of those choices, you get a neurochemical payoff. And it comes in the form of dopamine and acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is really about a spotlight of focus. And here I want, in fairness, I'm a big fan. I've been reading a lot of Cal Newport's work, Deep Work, A World Without Email. I've never met him, but I love his books. And he talks, some people call it flow, but what, you know, and people are familiar with flow, being engaged in an activity that's challenging. But there's something about activities that are forced restriction to one particular focus, right? So I'm going to write for 90 minutes, or I'm going to think for 90 minutes, or I'm just going to walk the dog. I live in an area now where I don't get reception on my dog walks. And at first it was excruciating. I love it now. It's like I just walk the dog. And there's mornings where I have a bulldog. He does not like to walk. So I'm like, I got to get back, and I'm frustrated. And I know, and it's hilarious, right? Because I notice myself and the way that my tripwire to agitation is so slight. I'm like one of these people, I can just, in a second, I'm aggravated because it's not happening as quickly. And so I've learned to make the whole walk a process of me just like recognizing these features of myself. And my bulldog Costello just plods along. He could care less. Right. So the walk is only about walking the dog. And the email, if it's email, is only about checking email. Right. And there's something valuable to this. And I think the brain loves this when we give it this. And the brain, unfortunately, is also happy to just take a smorgasbord of you know, pseudo-random thoughts and actions all day, every day. But there's something so deeply satisfying about focus. And I think we could all benefit from doing more of that. It's just so hard to do. And I'm not an anti-phone guy. I'm from Silicon Valley. I use the phone. I'm addicted to my phone. I admit it. I'm addicted to my phone. But I'm trying really hard to cultivate a different relationship to it, because I think that now that it's 2021, I think looking back, phones, we've had them for about 10 years. There are so many examples of ways in which they erode our best relationship to life. So many ways. that I don't think we should get rid of them, but I think we really need to start being conscious of the ways in which they are eroding our productivity, our creativity, our relationships. And I don't have any obvious answers to this. I just have tools that I use and that I've found to be of benefit. But I think in the next 5 years, we are going to see a shift toward people really moving away from phones in as much as we use them now.
Yeah, it almost seems like in our evolutionary history, we have to be more of a student of focus now, whereas life circumstances would naturally pull us towards lifting that weight of focus a little bit on our own. You still had to apply effort, but it's almost like trying to get good sleep now with a lot of sounds going in the background, or somebody every so often coming and waking you up and saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And you're like, right. "I'm sleeping." Like, right. I just, that's
tons of
my
interference.
Sleep. So it's almost like if you're not a student of focus today, I mean, most of my friends that have created, pretty large companies always tell me, and, we have this men's group that we meet up regularly and we chat. They say, it is definitely feels tougher to start a business today than even 10 years ago with the amount of distractions that are fighting for our attention.
Yeah. And there are different categories of people out there. And I want to be respectful of the fact that not everyone's trying to, build and create. But I would say if you're a creator, if you want to build something, business or write or music or sport or anything, I'll tell you, I'm fortunate to know a good number of very successful people. If you're a creator, you have to always ask yourself, are you playing offense? Are you playing defense? Or are you just bench warming? And most of the activities on the phone, not all of them, are in the defense or bench warming category. If you're a content creator, you want to be a content creator, you absolutely have to take the effort to create space in order to produce content. And that's going to require agitation and loneliness and frustration for brief periods of time. I'm not talking about for years of your life. I mean, for 5-10 minutes while you're not tending to the voices and the things that need you. And yeah, they need you and they will have anxiety and you will have yours. But people, if you're going to produce content, you need that to create that space. The other thing is that the phone is wonderful, right? You can turn on a Reverie hypnosis script and, just because it's there and you can use it. So I want to acknowledge its utility. It's a wonderful tool. But the other thing is that young people have integrated the phone into their nervous system in their lives in ways that other people haven't. So I would say that for people that are listening to this now in 2021 and they are 20 years or younger, chances are the phone isn't going to feel as intrusive as it will for somebody who's older than that. Just because of the way that when the nervous system wires up. Like I had a 14-year-old niece and the phone is just wired into her relationships. So if you take away her phone, she suffers in a way that maybe doesn't justify taking away the phone. So this is going to be an interesting kind of generational conversation. But if you have a hard time not turning off your phone for an hour to do focused work or 90 minutes, if that's a real challenge, that's a great invitation to start working through some of the neural circuits for what we call no-go. So I do this now. I'm revealing all my little weird quirks, but they're grounded in neuroscience. So we have circuits that are called go circuits. These are, if you want to look them up, they're circuits of the basal ganglia. And they're involved in anytime we make a decision to make a behavior like reach out. I just picked up the bottle, put it down deliberately. And then we have no-go circuits. These are ones that suppress behavior. And they've done a lot of beautiful experiments where you can create a video game or something where people have the impulse to make a choice in order to score points in a certain amount of time. And sometimes you have to go and sometimes you have to no-go. You have to avoid movement. And suppressing movement takes effort, right? And all you have to do is experience a social gathering and see one person pull out their phone and you just notice everyone pulls out their phone. That tells you it's been handed over to central pattern generators. I don't think it's conscious. I don't think people are like, oh, exciting, I'm going to look at my phone. It's literally just now it's socially cued. So it's sort of like someone wipes the side of their nose, like maybe they got something, and then people will just start doing this. This is like human behavior. We mimic each other subconsciously. So we do it with the phone. So I have this thing where I don't believe that we have as much attention deficit as people think. There's about 10% of the population that probably has legitimate attention deficit. It's getting worse and the numbers are creeping towards 12%, 15, and 20 in adults as well because of the phone, just to be totally honest. So this morning I experienced this. I went for a run. I was listening to music, and I wanted to see if I had reception and check something on my phone. And so I have a rule. I do 25 times a day. This is just my sense of order. 25 times a day, I try and suppress a desire to take an action. And I'll tell you, it was excruciating. I wanted to do it so badly. I don't even know why. It's just, I'm trying to override some circuitry to just look when I have reception, to just look at my phone, see where text messages or whatever, direct messages. So I get to the car, and I was like, whoa, I made it. Do I look now? And I thought, don't do it. Don't do it. And I'm thinking, I should do it. I should do it. And I sit there for about a minute. And this is crazy. Right? I'm a grown man, 45 years old, right? I should drive home. It's not, but I didn't do it. And I was like, this feels really good. So what I'm trying to do now is train myself to not be reflexive about the phone. And I think that requires a conscious effort. Eventually it'll become more automatic, in the same way that reaching for it became automatic. So these no-go circuits require a lot of energy, a lot of work, but we can train them up. And that's what's cool. And that's neuroplasticity, the brain's nervous system's ability to change in response to deliberate focus and experience. We're the only species, as far as we know, that can rewire our nervous system deliberately in this way. If other animals do it, like my dog Costello, if he tries to do this, he doesn't do it very well. But humans can do this. But the agitation of, the no-go effort is, I want to boldface and underline twice the word effort. It is supposed to feel challenging. So, I don't know that it's necessary. For some people might be very good at this. I think people who are older, 50, 60, they're probably better at this because their nervous system didn't incorporate the phone into their world quite as much. But, again, I don't want to demonize the phone, but I think learning to control one's behavior with the phone is going to be the distinction between those that are successful, I really believe this, and those that are not. And there will be a range there. It's not black and white, right? It's not a stark contrast. There'll be a number of shades of gray in between. But the better you are at controlling your relationship to distraction and to these impulses that draw you off track, the more you're going to be able to produce things. Also, the better you will be for relationships of all kinds. There are certain people that are more clued into this than others, but everybody appreciates like someone who's very present. I have a friend, it's funny, you introduce him to any of my girlfriends in the past, and they walk away. He's a really good friend, but I was always a little envious of him because they always go, he has the best presence. And you know what it is his phone never comes out of his pocket. And when you're with him, he's actually just talking to you. It's not that complicated.
Or he's not even thinking about their phone. Some people don't have their phone out, but you can tell that they're kind of thinking or they're waiting for that next moment.
Exactly.
And I think what you said is so beautiful because it's not just present on the micro, our own individual relationships, our relationship with our work, but it's also present on the macro. There was this really great Harvard Business Review article, we'll link to it in the show notes, where it said, what's the difference between people and companies, right? So personal brands and companies that get a little bit successful. Why are people who get a little bit successful, why don't they go on to become uber successful, like extremely successful when they already had that momentum? And a big part of it for both people and organizations, so anybody who's running teams, is distractions. As you get more successful, as you mentioned earlier, more opportunities come, more reasons to not focus. As a human level in our relationships, but also as a company level, you take on every opportunity instead of doing what got you there in the first place, which was doubling down on that focus. Right. So whether you run a team, whether this is in your household, whether it's just your own mind for your relationships, for your own mental health, focus is deeply linked with your own sense of contentment, joy, and success, however you define it.
Right. I absolutely agree. I'm still not through it all the way, but Cal Newport's book, A World Without Email, talks about this. I think he uses the phrase hyperactive hive mind in companies. This was adopted in the last 20 years or so, where it just seems like the more is better mentality, more interactions being better. And it's been shown, and he gives data to support this, that over and over again, the ability to just drop into focused work or work in small teams. I'm very blessed now. My podcast team is a wonderful group of 4 people, more or less. Having a small team is really beneficial. If you look in military special operations, they're very aware of limiting team size, in terms of, operators that work in groups of, 4 to 6 to 8. You can do incredible outsized things when a small group like that. When things get too big, it just wicks out and that's also when problems start arising. That's when people start making mistakes. Oversight is one source of that. Fatigue is another. And, I guess this is all to say that learning to cultivate a life of focus, and I should say it should be the way to support that is to have components of your day of wordlessness and defocus. I do want to emphasize that because it's not about waking up and from morning till night being ultra focused, right? I don't do the make my bed first thing. I admit it. I sometimes like it happens midday. Okay. All right. I wouldn't make it in the military, but we knew that already anyway. So it's about being in recognition of where you're at and focused and dropping in deeply for certain portions of the day. But I also have a deliberate decompress time of my day, right? I take 30 minutes a day and I either take a nap or I do a yoga nidra or I just let my mind go. But that does mean not mindless scrolling, although I do some mindless scrolling too. I allow myself that. But having periods of the day where you let the mind defocus and just kind of drift in the same way that your mind drifts a bit during sleep, that is what allows you to focus. So it very intensely afterward or on a consistent basis. So it's not about being a total animal from morning till night and then just expecting to switch off the thinking and go right to sleep. It's about, for me, there are really two 90-minute blocks, one early in the day and one later in the day where I commit to doing really focused work twice a day. And I have to fight tooth and nail to create the space for those and to make sure it happens. And and I fail a lot, if something gets in the way and I don't do that, I just try and get back on track as quickly as possible. I don't bring my phone. I put my phone on airplane mode when I'm training and doing any kind of physical work now because it's just too distracting.
I want to go back to something you shared earlier, which was this idea of a committee. You have these people in your life, whether you know them and some people you don't know, that are kind of, Seth Godin sometimes says, like, you don't always need a mentor, but you can have heroes in your life, right? People that you look up to. Who would be some other people that are on that committee of yours? People that you kind of like look to, even if you don't know them personally, for guidance, inspiration, or a reminder of sort of that intrinsic quality inside of you that you see in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So someone I keep in mind a lot is my graduate advisor, a woman by the name of Barbara Chapman. She's an excellent scientist. She passed away, unfortunately, too young, breast cancer, 50. But I think about Barbara a lot because her relationship to work was really special. She really understood what it was to be what we call a serious scientist. There's a phrase that scientists use, like, are they a serious scientist? Which is really about trying to seek truth. There's always an element of getting the paper published, getting the grant funded, packaging things in a way that's digestible. That's an important and vital part of the scientific process, of any process really. But she had this way in which she held the pursuit of facts, of truth, as holy above everything else. So I definitely keep Barbara in mind because there is a way in which we can start to delude ourselves into thinking, that our ideas are strong when, have we really thought through all the alternatives here? Have we really done that? But also just the purity of it, just in a life of inquiry or of any kind, just to really try and get close to why I started doing it. I started doing science because I was curious about how we work in the mind and body. It was just genuine curiosity. And so I keep her in mind a lot. I have a good friend, Pat Dossett, who was in the SEAL teams and then got out, and he and Blake Mykoski, who started Tom's Shoes, right? Have this company Made For that I'm on the advisory for. And Pat, I think of a lot. I'm fortunate to have him as a close friend because the way he does the little things is really impressive. He's always 5 minutes early, always. 5 minutes early. I struggle with punctuality. He's always 5 minutes early. He also is very good about the presence thing, like about what he's doing. He's also very good. He's probably always 5 minutes early because he always leaves when he needs to leave. This is something I actually learned from him. When it's time to go, you just say, thanks, I'm out. Like none of the long trailing goodbyes. That's which is something I'm guilty of. But also I really appreciate his ethics, and he's somebody who thinks very deeply about why one started something and staying on that. So those two, and of course there are so many amazing examples out there of impressive people, but they're the ones I think about a lot lately in terms of really trying to stay close to the central chord of why I'm here and what I'm trying to do, which is trying to discover and share knowledge in ways that are useful to people. And I'd be remiss. I'm sort of laughing in advance of this. I'm chuckling, but I think about my bulldog Costello way too much. I talk about him all the time now on my podcast and other podcasts, but I think about him a lot and the way he approaches life, because dogs are incredible because you see tremendous variation in one species, dogs, of different temperaments and body sizes and behaviors. And his temperament is unique. It's stubborn and joyful and all, but like there's something about stubbornness. He's so stubborn, and it's teaching me actually to be more stubborn about, like, I know what I like and I know why I'm here and what I'm doing. It took me a long time to find that, but I'm starting to become more, I'm trying to internalize Costello more. So he definitely has a spot at the committee table. And bulldogs are hedonists too. He loves sleep. And the way he eats food it's insane. He can devour like a huge bowl of food. So so I'm actually trying to cultivate a little bit more of his like love for food and love for sleep, and like really enjoy what it is I'm doing. And I'm also starting to become more and more stubborn, but maybe that's just aging.
There's a short little book by Eckhart Tolle, author of Power of Now and stuff. And it's called Guardians of Being. And it's basically about animals.
Beautiful title.
It's about animals.
Oh,
pets.
man. Is it? I'm going to get this book today.
Dogs,
really?
Cats primarily, but it's basically how, as human beings, we struggle so much with our mind pulling us in so many different directions. And for some people it's a lifelong battle. They feel it really shouldn't be a battle, but it's a lifelong battle with their mind and not getting space and sort of awareness. And inside of there, it's like really talking about how pets can be one of the greatest reminders about presence in our lives and reflecting back upon us the things that we might need or benefit from.
Oh my God.
And I just thought of that when you brought it up.
Thank you. I'm a huge, I'm obsessed with animals, and I've heard of Eckhart Tolle. I know a little bit of his stuff. My sister, who's a therapist, is obsessed with his work and really loves it. I'm definitely going to get this book and check it out, because I think animals have a lot to teach us about how we work, because their nervous systems, I've looked at a lot of them, admittedly, their nervous systems are simpler. And what you find in simpler nervous systems is that a couple core sets of operations are extremely well honed. So the bulldog is the bulldog because their brain is organized that way. A scent hound or a retriever behaves that way because of the way their nervous system is organized. And human beings are gifted with this potential to have so many different behaviors, or learn music or not, learn basketball or not. Other animals don't get that set of choices. And I think it leads to a confusion about who we are and what we're about. We are about variety and choice and optionality. And that's wonderful on the one hand, but I think if we want to understand what the extreme version of any kind of expression would be, of stubbornness, of glee, of creativity, I think animals can reveal that to us, because they are the more focused, honed down example of the way a nervous system could be built. And so I'm excited to read this book.
You just, that reminds me that I've heard you share in other interviews that you were kind of obsessed with animals and animal movement growing up. And also just recently you did a whole series on kind of movement, and in one of them, movement, muscle growth, giving a lot of different, tips. You talk about posture, right? What's important for people to understand when it comes to exactly this topic that we're chatting about, which is movement, function, the body controlling the brain. What's important for people to understand when it comes to this topic of posture?
Yeah. And always when the word posture is spoken, then everyone starts noting their posture. I have a friend, Kelly Starrett, who does a lot of work in the, is a company called the Ready State. They've done a lot of work in like physical rehabilitation, sports performance, and this kind of thing. He's a tremendous athlete. He and his wife, Julia, are both really amazing athletes. And he always says they're big on the standing desk thing. They've got kids. They've been doing a bunch of work to get standing desks into schools. But he also makes this comment that, we weren't meant to sit all day, but we also weren't meant to stand all day. So, the idea is that we should be able to move in a lot of different dimensions and feel comfortable doing that. The movement is a huge discussion, but there are a couple things that relate to posture that are interesting. One thing that I've learned from Kelly, and that's certainly been true for me in terms of longevity in sport and just making me feel better all around, is that usually when we have pain someplace, that the solution lies in doing some work in strengthening the musculature above and below that pain. So we tend to focus like on the knee when it's really like maybe you need to do a lot of like tibialis work or hip work, because the knee injury is a reflection of the way that the body moves or fails to move on the whole. So one of the things that I've become conscious of is in looking at the literature is that things that generate asymmetries create problems. They really do. And so trying to really cultivate symmetry in terms of a lot of unilateral movements for weight training, for instance. So like unilateral leg movements or unilateral arm movements, they bring about balance because we develop these asymmetries the same way we become right-handed and left-handed, where most of us aren't ambidextrous. The phone, again, is terrible. We're all starting to look like a folded over accordion or a semi-melted candle, right? Me included, if I'm not conscious of it. It is very clear, and the yogis will attest to this, but I don't do a lot of yoga, admittedly, that we are in internal rotation too much. So a simple test people can do is if they just relax and they point out their standing, relax, and they put out their thumbs. If your thumbs are pointed in, chances are your shoulder is internally rotated, right? And that some strengthening of the upper back muscles and rear neck muscles should be done so that we're not in external rotation like the Fonzie thing. Half of the people listening to this won't know who Fonzie is, but like the thumbs pointing out in both directions. But that doing movements of that sort can then allow us to be neutral, right? Shoulder neutral again. So I've got a friend and he texts, if you're listening to this and not watching on video, he texts with his phone up near his face, even on the street, which is hilarious, but his posture is amazing. Great posture is such a boon to life. And so these little things like internal, whether or not we're overly internally rotated, trying to be a little bit more externally rotated. The other thing is with respect to exercise that has been fun for me to learn about is, not everybody, including myself, has time or interest in doing a lot of different kinds of like animal movement. I'm a huge fan of mobility. That stuff is beautiful. Like the stuff like Ido Portal's movement culture stuff. If people haven't, everyone knows who he is, presumably. But if you don't, check out his Instagram. He's just been doing this for so long, but just incredible suppleness of movement and balance and sure strength and all that, but huge range of movement. So-called movement culture is the phrase that he coined. But one of the things that's been fun to incorporate is, we can do what are called open and closed chain movements. Closed chain movement would be where like our hands and feet are in contact with the ground. So think down dog is closed chain, right? Think jumping, that's open chain, right? Shooting a free throw is open chain. You're actually pushing through. The nervous system actually, there's an interesting literature on this, scientific literature, that closed chain movement tends to build, now it's going to sound very Eastern philosophy, but build energy in the system. We tend to come away from it feeling kind of invigorated and charged. And that's because of the way that we have these chains of what are called ganglia, neurons along the spinal cord. And when we engage in movement that's closed chain, where we're in contact with things at both sides, the way they fire is kind of in sequence. And when we come away from that movement or those types of movements, we tend to feel kind of like energized, kind of like jacked up, and like we have energy. Whereas jumping movements or throwing movements, like if you were to physically throw a medicine ball or you were to, some people can do this, don't hurt yourself folks, but like you do a chin up, but you actually blast through the chin up and let go of the bar for a second. Those are incredibly taxing, but they are very good for dumping excess energy. So a lot of people are stressed and then they're going to work out, but they're coming out of the workouts with more energy, neural energy, than they went in. And when I say neural energy, just so in case there's some neuroscientists out there, I don't want you to think I've, completely lost my mind. What I'm talking about is what you're creating is a potential for the nerve cells to fire, like a readiness to fire. So things like martial arts they cultivate these practices, both open chain and closed chain, kind of intuitively. And there's a practice, a lot of like exhale, emphasize breathing on ballistic movements, like that's actually expelling energy, which is a wonderful thing if you tend to carry too much stress. Whereas going and just lifting weights, closed chain movements, barbell curls, bench presses and thing, you're actually creating more tension in the neural readiness in the system. Does that make sense?
Absolutely makes sense.
So this is kind of I rather than get too scientific about this, it would take hours. What I think was kind of fun for people perhaps to explore is the extent to which different kinds of movements, like with continuous tension, will kind of create energy. So you can come out of those workouts feeling really focused and like energized. Whereas if you're somebody who tends to just feel like you're carrying tons of tension inside, you want to dump energy, then throwing things, ballistic movements, like where you're just literally like dumping all your energy, these so-called open chain movements, if you can handle it, like jumping and ballistic stuff, those can be very beneficial. And all these have roots in the way that motor neurons of the nervous system work. And again, it's kind of fun to just look to animals and just see a lot of them, they look different because they do different types of movements, right? A kangaroo doesn't look like a tiger for a reason. It's you think it's because of its body, but its body is a reflection of the way the nervous system works, not the other way around.
In addition to this through line where we were started off talking about movement, being able to focus the mind, you also have been very open that you were recommended to go see a therapist when you were really young. And what did you feel that you got out of therapy, in addition to this fitness training and the working out that you were doing? What was the real sort of distinction that came for you at an early age that maybe wasn't a way that you saw either yourself or the world? Yeah, well, and to be honest, earlier you asked, who's at my committee, so I, believe it or not, somehow I figured out a way to make this work, even in tough financial times. And I know not everyone can do that, but I've been one way or another, so I've been seeing that same therapist for, I think it's now been 35 years. Incredible.
We have a very close relationship, obviously.
Yep.
I think it's a healthily boundaried relationship. Actually, until I learned Oliver Sacks, who passed away, the neurologist, a man who mistook a wife for a hat. I have very few heroes in life. Oliver Sacks is absolutely one of them. Incredible. If you haven't seen the movie the documentary movie about him, it's incredible, about the field of neurology. He had a therapist, I think, for 42 years. So, and then I felt kind of vindicated because what did I learn from therapy? Well, as a young person, I didn't have a choice but to go. I had to go if I want to be admitted back in school and stay in school. But what I learned pretty quickly was that therapy has multiple levels of support. One is somebody who's just going to hear you. A lot of people just don't have the opportunity to share what's going on with themselves. A lot of people,
sometimes they may not even know what they think because they haven't said it out loud.
Yeah, most of us barely can understand what we're thinking and feeling, much less what anyone else is feeling. So the next time you think that you understand what someone is thinking and feeling, remember, most of us don't even understand what we are thinking and feeling. But I got lucky. He's somebody who's extremely smart and encouraged me to take on physical practices and use those as a portal, not just, lie on the couch and talk about problems. In fact, these days, we don't even really talk about problems per se. The way therapy works, there are multiple aspects to this. But one is you're trying to create a place where you can explore your own mind. That's really what good therapy is about. It might start with a problem or a conflict, but it's really about being able to explore your own mind. And you're constantly asking the question, what's driving this behavior or this pattern of thought? Why am I anxious? And the immediate answer is never the answer. If you think, oh, I'm anxious because I've got too much work or I've got these things, sure, that's true. But what you're really starting to do is peel back the layers. And what you're trying to do is create, through the relationship with the therapist, you're trying to create a process, a reflective process. The goal of the therapist is to make themselves obsolete. That's very clear. I've asked this numerous times throughout the years, like, when are we done? And we're done when we know we're done, because I was told, because you internalize a reflective process, an ability to see a problem or see a circumstance and take a stance of, where am I in this situation? Where are they? And to start parsing out the pieces. And it sounds very abstract, and some people might just think, like, this is terrible. When I feel stressed, I go for a run. And I agree. I think an exploration of thinking of the mind is not for everybody. I do think that somatic therapies are now becoming more and more popular, because many people just think, like, why would I want to talk about a problem? It just makes the problem worse. It heightens my focus on the problem. I absolutely agree. I just personally have found great depth of experience in realizing how crazy my mind is, and how it will come up with these theories about why I feel a certain way, and how through a reflective process, I can now, certainly not in the past, but now I can sort of get distance from things very quickly. And I think that can only come about through really being able to sit with your thinking, sit with your feelings. And sure, over the years, there have been events in my life that have, where it was like crisis management, for sure. It's like, how are we going to manage this personal crisis? But I think therapy is if the relationship is right, I think it can be a beautiful experience, and it can change the way that you view the mind. And for me, therapy nowadays is not so much about me getting anything out of it. It's just making sure that I can show up as well as I can to the other things and people in my life. But, and for people that can't, fortunately, therapy has become more accepted and more, hopefully more affordable. But for people that can't afford therapy, there is a version of this that's going to sound ridiculously simple, but being able to journal in full honesty with oneself is very powerful. Journaling is, I would say, and writing is the way that human beings have worked out a lot of their internal conflicts and discovered incredible depth of meaning and excitement and creativity over for centuries, thousands of years. So if people can't get access to a therapist, I would encourage them to journal with the full understanding that no one is going to read those journals. A lot of people start third personing. They start thinking they're writing their life book or their memoir. Really journaling in full honesty is powerful. Some people look at this as a data dump, like just a way to kind of get all the mess out early in the day. That's powerful. As is sitting down and deciding to write in full honesty about something that's extremely challenging, or that one is extremely ashamed of, or afraid that people will ever find out, or these kinds of things. Because there's something about the way, if the mind sees truth, like it sees its internal externalized, it immediately looks crazy. And in that recognition that so much of what goes on in our heads is crazy, there's this weird thing, I don't really understand it, where like other amazing things crop up as surprises. Let me give a different example. Nowadays, the words gaslighting comes up a lot. People are like, you're gaslighting. I'm very averse to people using clinical terms in the context of, online psychology. It just doesn't seem to, it doesn't work for me. But the reality is that most people, when they feel something they don't want to feel, they use what's called evacuative projection. They try and project it out. They try and evacuate the feeling. This is something so learning to just be able to sit with that, and journaling is one way to do that. It overcomes this need to evacuate anger, frustration, etc. So the mind's natural reflex is, when it doesn't feel something it likes, to look for something external to solve the problem, or to evacuate the problem.
Right. And you've talked about how that can create like even dopamine inside of the brain.
Yeah.
So some people are just
projection
to projecting it out.
Projection is a good one. And the simplest example of projection is physical aggression. I'm angry with you. I come over and hit you. I've evacuated the feeling, right?
Right.
And it's an example, unless it's in the context of like sanctioned martial arts where it's consensual or something like that. It is always an example of weakness. Always. Well, unless it's warfare or something like that, where there's a purpose, right? You know, the military or whatever it is, but where there's a contract of people in battle. So we started off talking about sort of like the therapy model, but journaling and learning to deliberately evacuate thoughts and feelings onto paper. There's something about the way that the mind recognizes its own self, because you're basically taking your mind and you're putting it to paper. When you read and hear those words, when you see that happening, it has this amazing ability to untangle what seems like a mess. And so, I feel like it's important that people understand that there doesn't need to be another person there. Although if it's the right person, that can be a real accelerator to the whole process.
Hey YouTube, if you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Andrew Huberman, you're gonna love this conversation I had with Dr. Gabor Mate on getting to the root of any addiction, any negative pattern you have in your life. Check it out.
There's also a difference between fault and responsibility. Yes, it's my responsibility how I lived my life. I did it. I mean, I did it